So next up on Hurley in the Morning today is Cassy Weber. Cassy is the CEO of MindFuel, mindfuel.ca. MindFuel is an education technology leader that brings STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, to life both inside and outside the K-12 classrooms. We're going to talk about Canada's innovation landscape, how education, K-12 and beyond, fits into that landscape, and how we can make some connections and maybe previously we haven't been making. So Cassy, welcome to Voice Ed Radio and Hurley in the Morning.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's good of you to get up early in the morning to speak with me. I know you're out in Alberta, and so our time, there's a time difference there. So I appreciate this.
Well, thanks so much. I'm calling from Canmore, Alberta, right near Banff.
Oh, okay. Is snow?
Yeah. Not a lot, actually. It's a Chinook.
Oh, those Chinooks.
Yes.
Could be on the ski hill one day and on the golf course the next, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Cassy, tell me a little bit about MindFuel and sort of that journey that got you so passionately involved in the world of STEM.
Well, MindFuel has, I think it's 32 years now.
Really?
We've been immersed in the STEM space, focusing on K-12. And over the years, of course, depending on what the needs are in different parts of Canada, we've evolved our programming. But generally speaking, we have kind of two camps. One is focused on the online space and specifically interactive STEM learning. And then the other camp, which I think we'll probably focus on today, is in the youth innovation space. And specifically youth innovation in K-12.
Now, I can't imagine an organization that's been around for over 3 decades being called MindFuel at all stages of your life. Is that a rebrand or a renaming of the organization?
It is, as a matter of fact. Our registered charity is called Science Alberta Foundation. And we operated under that name throughout most of the late 80s, early 90s. And then as we realized that our programming was expanding and distributing across Canada, we thought, it probably would fit to have a different operating name. And so did lots of work and we arrived at MindFuel.
Okay. So Alberta, yeah. ASF originally.
SAF, Science Alberta.
Science Alberta, yeah. Okay. Because MindFuel just sounds like a startup name. I love it. I love it. It just activates my imagination. And speaking of activating imaginations, let's talk about the innovation space in Canada. You make mention of it, and I know you're passionate about nurturing conversations about it. What are we talking about when we're talking about innovation and an innovation space?
Yes. So when we talk about, and I'm deeply passionate about this area, but when we talk about innovation, it's a word that we hear a lot. We as in, all across Canada, people will use the word innovation, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When we talk about the innovation index, every country, every OECD country has, what we call an innovation index or ranking. And so Canada is, it's ranked number 17 in the World Innovation Index. That's from 2019. And so there's a lot of inputs that go into that assessment, and that's really 5 key areas. Institutions, which would include like political environment, regulatory environment, etc. Human capital and research, and that's very much the K-12 space and the post-secondary space. And within that space, our research and development. And then we have the infrastructure, which is critical, market sophistication, and that's, credit tools, investment tools, trade, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, business sophistication. And so when we look at assessing all of those 5 things, and it's not, when I say we, it's not MindFuel. I mean, they're entire, companies dedicated to this very thing. Then a country is ranked. And so looking at all those 5 areas, Canada is ranked as number 17, which is not bad because, there's, I think, around 127 countries that are ranked, but that means there's room for improvement.
So in the current COVID crisis, is the index something that you can map some of the innovations in terms of vaccine development? Can you map it against that index? Are there some connections?
Oh, absolutely. I think that would be a good test model. How responsive are our institutions? How prepared? What's our state of readiness in terms of human capital and research? Do we have the infrastructure for rapid development and deployment? Our market sophistication? Are researchers getting the required investments they need to accelerate their invention? And do we have the right knowledge workers and sort of innovation channels, supply chain to distribute? That would be a wonderful test model.
Right. And so when you develop an index of any sort, whether it's PISA results in the education system or standardized tests across a school district, people look at those and say, okay, well, who's ahead of me? Who's behind me? Who's doing really well on the index that we might be able to learn from?
Well, there's, we can call other countries, for instance, exemplars, I guess, right? And some of those exemplars, when we look at our ranking of 17th, that means there's 16 countries who, have an overall higher aggregate score. And those would be countries like Switzerland, Sweden, the US, Finland, the Netherlands, I think Singapore and Germany are in there as well. There's 16 others, right? And so to put context to Canada's ranking of 17th, I think I'm just looking at a source document to make sure I have the numbers right. So that gives us, 17 gives us a score of 53.88 out of 100.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's not, it's, I think with that score, we understand that we're not talking about other countries that have 100 out of 100. I don't know that that's ever really attainable, but
right.
Yeah.
At the same time, if I brought home a 53.3 on a math test in high school, I would have been grounded.
Yeah.
So numbers can be deceiving. Can we unpack it a little bit? Are there areas that when you disaggregate the index a little bit, that where Canada is excelling, that we might be able to leverage a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that when we look at market sophistication, I think Canada does quite well, and institutions. I think the scores I'm looking at are the assessments for Canada from the WIPO index. On market sophistication, we rank second, and on institutions, we rank fourth. So those are pretty darn good. But then when you look at human capital and research, and this is where MindFuel focuses, our youth innovation program, on human capital and research, we rank 19th.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so there's an area where we say, this is an area that we can support. We support it in a very small way, but imagine if organizations and companies and institutions across the country all supported this particular area.
Let's dig into the human capital one because it's interesting. Who is part of that? Are we talking about adults? Are we talking about adults and young people? Are we talking about people that have been in a profession for a while? Who makes up that human capital part of that index?
So it's generally the education space, and that would include K-12.
Oh,
and tertiary education, so post-secondary, and then our research and development in post-secondary institutions. Not just post-secondary, though. There's lots of R&D that occurs outside of the post-secondary environment, but that is human capital. That is what determines a country's long-term economic sustainability or viability, right? It's like a pipeline into the future.
so if K-12 were part of the futures market, for example, if you're looking at the stock markets like pig futures or pork futures, what do we need to be paying attention to then? What does this tell you as someone that's committed to the education space?
This tells me that this is a long-term game in a big way. So if we want 600,000 more workers, skilled and knowledgeable workers, let's say in the area of robotics or artificial intelligence by 2025, then we need to start today. We needed to start 5 years ago.
Right.
In order to provide the talent in that area which will drive that economic sector, which means there's a responsibility in the K-12 sector to prepare students to be ready to go into those areas in post-secondary, so they're ready to be employed in that area upon graduation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about issues like this in education, often we immediately turn to better trained, more qualified educators in front of students or beside students. Is that the main issue here, or is there policy and curriculum issues as well that need to be addressed?
I think all of the above. Yeah, they're all equally important. So when we look at training and skills development, I mean, educators in general receive training and skills upgrading based on the guidances of their teachers' associations and on the curricular requirements. And then, of course, ministries oversee curriculum and are constantly updating and evaluating if the curriculum is in line with, current learning, current pedagogies, that sort of thing. And so again, these are things that ministries of education across Canada do all the time, mm-hmm. right? So it's not that these things aren't being done. But when we look at, here's a concrete example, coding skills and training. There are very few curricula in Canada that actually have that as part of the learning requirement for students in K-12. In most cases, in most provinces, it's up to the teacher to determine whether or not there is an opportunity to bring coding skills and training learning into the classroom.
Now, in Ontario here in September, our new math curriculum inscribed coding right from K-12. And so Ontario is one that has gone in that direction. Other provinces are not?
Not, I don't want to call out provinces.
Okay, but, well, sure we can. We can do that.
but generally speaking, there's great room for bringing this into curricular learning across Canada, and I applaud Ontario and British Columbia as well for making this area of learning a core part of the curriculum.
Do you think that this time of pandemic and the some of the the political conversations and even the hand-wringing at municipal levels about our lack of ability to produce a vaccine, for example, let alone distribute and get it out there. Is this going to cause us to maybe re-envision what our K-12 education systems need to prioritize or imagine?
I think these types of situations, Stephen, you've just really nicely summarized the issue here. These types of situations create opportunities for a reevaluation of the way we're doing things versus the way we ought to be doing things. There's no reason Canada should not be able to produce a vaccine. I just read last week that McMaster University is one of the most highly published, the Faculty of Medicine, highly published medical institutes. And so while we have the thought leadership, I don't think the issue is a lack of thought leadership. I think getting back to those 5 core areas, I think the overall system needs to be better coordinated, which leads to all sorts of positive outcomes. The outputs, if you will, which is mobilizing our knowledge. So that we have knowledge creation. So for instance, a vaccination would fall into that as an output.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I think academic research and even research and development, we tend to think, as Canadians, we tend to think of this happening at universities and in laboratories. Do we need to rethink that as we look to develop human capital in this area?
I think so. And I think when we look at what's, call it the feeder system or the pipeline. So it's high school students who are moving into those post-secondary environments. And so one of the things MindFuel has done, we just concluded a 5-year pilot where we moved 4,300 students, high school students, and some collegiate students through what we call our transformative learning framework, and we dub it our Youth Innovation Gateway. And so what our interest was throughout the pilot was understanding if you can create an innovation mindset in youth. And, that was, call it our hypothesis. Can we create an innovation mindset in youth? And how do we know if we've created that? And then what are the key indicators that students have moved through a program in a way that can be measured? And so, yes, you can. That's the okay.
Really interesting, and I would love to know what you've learned about creating that innovative and innovation mindset. When I was growing up, the mindset was go get a good job and keep it for 30 years, which is what I did. But that's not very innovative, right? So and I think there are still remnants of that, living in the DNA of our communities and our families. So how have you learned to maybe nurture and push back against some of that in your organization?
Yeah. So I think when we understand what youth, and when I say youth, I mean this is generally people under the age of 30, but our pilot focused on kind of that high school student cohort. When we talk about an innovation mindset, it's much more than just having the requisite knowledge in a particular area of science. It's critically about collaboration, understanding how to collaborate, because real world problems are rarely, if ever, solved by one individual. Right? It's a highly collaborative process. It's an iterative process. So we help students redefine their relationship with failure, right? Because we're trained to perform at kind of the top levels, right? So we have this built-in adverse reaction to failure, but failure is a critical part of iterating and innovation. And then students need an appropriate framework, which is easily done through workshops, of understanding things like design thinking, ideation. And it's a pretty magical thing when you get 200 or 300 students together in a workshop, and you start moving the students usually in clusters, or groups, through all of these phases of innovation. And they, it's usually around a 10-month process, but they come out of their first cycle very different people, and they view the world very differently. They understand that there are solutions to real world problems, and then they begin developing their own passions and curiosity. So I think there's a lot of work we can do in that K-12 space that prepares students to be ready to tackle their areas of interest in post-secondary.
It sounds like intense but fulfilling work, and I'm there are two words or phrases, terms that come to mind, and one is agency, and that's the sense that I as an individual can make a difference in the world through this, and the other is self-efficacy, that I actually have what it takes to do it, and I'm thinking that your programs in that regard probably nurture both of those.
Very much so. Very much so. I think if there's sort of one key thing that we accomplish is building self-confidence in students, because when a student feels confident about their ability to unpack a problem, they will really bring the very best of themselves into addressing it. And I think a lot of students learn along the way that innovation is something that can be learned. It's not something you're necessarily born with, right? I mean, there are obviously innovators in the world who were born, right, to be change makers, but those are the exceptions.
And we're talking about more than product innovation. We're talking about social innovation and other types of innovation in our societies. I'm thinking of the book by Eric Liu called Imagination First. And in that book, he talks about the trajectory or the connection between imagination, creativity, and innovation. And sometimes we jump to the innovation before acknowledging the role of imagination and creativity. And so the question I'm asking is, are there curriculum areas other than science and technology and mathematics that could help nurture and support this type of innovative thinking and innovation thinking?
Very much so, and that's the STEAM, right? That's really the STEAM space, where if you think of it as a Zen or a Venn diagram.
I like Zen diagrams too.
Yeah, Zen. Let's rename it the Zen diagram. But really, that's the space that students, when they occupy that space where there's humanities and science and technology and math and communications, right? That's kind of the center space. That is when they are able to make meaning of the world around them. And it is very one-dimensional if they're only cultivated to function in one of those areas. So you're absolutely right. We need art and science and math and communications.
Yeah.
And I separate communications out from the core areas of learning because we can be the most creative, innovative thinkers in the world, but if we can't communicate it, then it's not really beneficial to all of society.
And Cassy, I'm thinking another thing that has been writ large in this time of COVID are some of the issues around equity and access. And I'm wondering how your organization is helping bring those conversations to light. Are all STEM opportunities created equal, and do people have equal access to them?
Very important. You raise a very important point. When we look at underrepresented populations, and I'll just focus this on Canada, it's a very large space. And it's, if I bring underrepresented populations within the STEM context into focus, we are talking about students who are rural or remote. If they're situated in rural and remote locations, newcomers, a lot of females in STEM because there is an underrepresentation at the post-secondary level. Indigenous students, absolutely. They represent 4% of Canada's population, yet we're not seeing those numbers translate in those post-secondary STEM fields. Then we have students who have English as a second language or English as an additional language. We have economically disadvantaged students. So it's a very large space that we're defining as underrepresented. And when we look at a classroom, a typical classroom in K-12, ironically, what we see is the majority of the classroom is populated by those underrepresented students. Mm-hmm. And so I ask myself, why are we not seeing those numbers translate into STEM representation in post-secondary or further down the innovation value chain, if you will, in startups, in CEOs of companies, so on and so forth. So this is a long-term fix. It's not an overnight fix.
So maybe in the final reel, Cassy, and you've been very generous with your time and your insights. I really appreciate that. Where do we begin? What's a small step that might lead to a larger step? Because it seems very overwhelming at this point for many people, I'm sure, and maybe even some days for you.
Yes. I think where we begin is focusing on the K-12 space and understanding that the positive impact of having programs that support a youth innovation mindset, the development of a youth innovation mindset, that will have the biggest impact in all other kind of upstream components, if you will. Mm-hmm. If our K-12 students are leaving that part of their life with a mindset that they do make a difference, they can make a difference, they can address some of these really pressing real world problems, then of course you'll see that in post-secondaries, you'll see that in these creative outputs. So that's things like patents and tangible knowledge, things. And then ultimately you'll see that in our numbers, our StatsCan numbers that show how many, like what our shortage of skilled workers is. That number should be narrowing. And then ultimately you'll see that in our GDP.
So we have trailing indicators, leading indicators. I would love to have another conversation with you about that and that idea of looking upstream. Can we come back to some of this?
Oh, I would love to.
Well, Cassy Weber is the CEO of MindFuel. It's an education technology organization. Well, you know what it's about because you've just heard the conversation. So Cassy, thank you so much. And we can get in touch with you at mindfuel.ca.
Yes. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much, Stephen.